Do you ever feel exhausted from always holding it together, smiling on the outside while inside you're anxious, lonely, or afraid of being left behind? No matter how much you achieve, the emptiness lingers. This isn't weakness, it's survival. Psychologists call it parentification and hypervigilance, when as a child you had to trade play for responsibility, learning to keep the peace instead of feeling safe. And now, as an adult, the armor remains. Your body tense, your mind always on guard, longing for the carefree childhood that was never yours. A 7-year-old child faces a broken parent. It might be addiction that consumes them, anger that erupts without warning, or the hollow silence of a person who has already given up. The details vary, but the weight is the same. The parent is absent in the moments that matter most. For a child, this absence is not just confusing, it is terrifying. Children are wired to depend on their caregivers for safety. When that safety collapses, something irreversible begins to take shape. In that silence, the child makes a decision far beyond their years, not with words but with instinct. The realization comes like a shadow across their mind. If I don't hold everything together, no one will. At 7 years old, they are no longer simply a child. They become a caretaker, a peacekeeper, a quiet guardian of a world that feels like it might fall apart at any second. And with that decision, part of them vanishes, not in body, but in spirit. What disappears is the freedom to be vulnerable, the freedom to play, the freedom to need. From the outside, little seems to change. The child still eats breakfast, still goes to school, still plays, on the surface. But internally, the shift is enormous. They begin to scan the room with a seriousness far beyond their age, learning to read facial expressions and tones of voice, the way other children learn to read books. Their nervous system becomes finely tuned to danger. They laugh only when it feels safe, cry only when no one can hear, and step into the role of emotional regulator for the people who should have been regulating themselves. This early disappearance is not noticed by most. Adults may even praise it. You're so mature, they say. So responsible. Teachers, relatives, even neighbors admire the composure. But what they are praising is not maturity. It is survival. It is the mask of adulthood forced onto a child's face long before their mind and body are ready to carry it. The cost of that mask is invisible in the moment, but it is heavy. The child has traded authenticity for security, their own needs for the fragile peace of the household. This is the quiet beginning of a lifelong pattern. It doesn't end at 7, it doesn't end at childhood. It follows into adolescence, into adulthood, shaping every relationship and every sense of self. The child disappears so that the family can survive. But in that disappearance, the roots of future pain are already planted. And those roots will grow until someone finally notices. Not the mask, not the performance, but the small, silenced child beneath it, waiting to be seen. The child smiles more. They learn quickly that a smile can calm the room, can soften the edge in a parent's voice, can buy a few precious minutes of safety. They cry less because tears invite frustration, or worse, silence that feels like rejection. They scan the room before speaking, measuring every word against the shifting moods of the adults around them. Childhood curiosity becomes replaced by calculation, the kind of vigilance that belongs to soldiers, not to 7-year-olds. On the surface, these behaviors look admirable. Teachers comment on how well behaved the child is. Relatives praise them for being so polite, so easy to manage. Strangers marvel at how independent they seem. The words come again and again: mature, strong, responsible. And in a culture that values composure and resilience, the child is celebrated. But what no one sees is the cost of that performance. Each compliment is a reminder that their survival mask is working, and so they keep wearing it longer, tighter, until they no longer know where the mask ends and where they begin. This is the invisible grief of those who grew up too fast. It is invisible because the outside world sees competence, not pain. They see achievement, not the fear that drives it. They see strength, not the exhaustion hidden underneath. The grief lies in the gap between how they appear and how they actually feel. It lies in the birthdays they never truly enjoyed, the moments of play abandoned too soon, the sense of safety that never arrived. Inside, the child still aches. They ache for someone to notice without being told. They ache for a hug given freely, for reassurance that their tears are not a burden, but instead they learn to silence those needs, tucking them away like forbidden treasures. They begin to believe that their worth is conditional, valuable only when they are useful, lovable only when they are calm. And so they grow into the role of caretaker, the quiet achiever, the emotional anchor for everyone else. This identity becomes so convincing that even the child forgets it is a mask. They believe the narrative adults project onto them. They believe they are stronger than they feel, older than they are, responsible for things far beyond their control. And in believing it, they push the true self deeper underground. The tragedy is that this adjustment, while praised in childhood, carries into adulthood. The same habits that once ensured survival begin to suffocate. The constant smiling, the avoidance of tears, the scanning of every room. These become patterns so ingrained that breaking them feels dangerous. What began as resilience hardens into rigidity. What was once intelligence begins to imprison. And yet, beneath that surface, the inner child has not vanished. They remain, waiting, carrying silent questions. Will anyone ever see me? Will anyone ever tell me it was never my job to hold it all together? That longing sets the stage for the next chapter, where the cost of survival becomes impossible to ignore. The invisible grief of those who grew up too fast does not end with smiles and silence. It deepens into a hidden role reversal that reshapes the entire foundation of childhood. This is where the concept of parentification begins to take root. Parentification describes a reversal of roles that should never fall on a child's shoulders. Instead of being cared for, the child becomes the one who provides care. They step into the role of caregiver, peacekeeper, therapist, even protector. The parent's needs, moods, and crises take center stage, and the child learns to orbit around them, constantly adjusting to prevent further collapse. What is natural becomes unnatural, and it becomes unnatural. What should have been protection turns into pressure. In this role, the child begins to absorb responsibilities far beyond their years. They may comfort a parent after a fight, soothe the sibling's tears, or carefully predict how the evening will unfold depending on the sound of footsteps at the door. These are not isolated moments, but daily habits, shaping the nervous system in ways that last for decades. When repeated often enough, the brain adapts. It rewires itself to survive. This rewiring is what psychologists call hypervigilance, a constant scanning of the environment for danger, a readiness to respond before harm arrives. Hypervigilance feels like always walking on eggshells. The child studies tone of voice, facial expressions, even the smallest shifts in silence, learning to anticipate trouble before it begins. The body stays on alert, as though living in a war zone. Adrenaline surges at small sounds. Muscles stay tense without rest. Sleep is shallow, filled with alertness. Joy feels fleeting because safety never lasts long enough for true relaxation. For most children, home is a sanctuary. For the parentified child, home is a training ground for survival, a place where safety depends entirely on their performance. Within this survival system comes a new definition of love. Love is no longer experienced as unconditional warmth. It becomes a transaction. If the child can provide calm, if they can smooth over conflict, if they can take care of someone else's needs, then maybe, just maybe, they will receive safety in return. Affection is not guaranteed. It must be earned. Care is not spontaneous. It must be bargained for. The child internalizes a message that will follow them into adulthood. Peace is given, but only if you pay for it. The tragedy is that their own needs are marked as dangerous. When they cry, it creates tension. When they ask for attention, it risks rejection. So they suppress these impulses and bury them deep. Over time, they almost forget what it feels like to want freely, to express honestly, to expect care without fear of punishment. What takes the place of authentic need is performance. They become the reliable one, the strong one, the endlessly giving one. And the more convincing the performance, the less anyone suspects the child is struggling at all. This is how a mask is built. Not out of choice, but out of necessity, and once it is in place, it clings tightly. The child begins to believe the role themselves. They are no longer just playing caretaker. They are caretaker. They are no longer pretending to be strong. They must be strong. And behind that mask, the question remains, who notices the cost, and when will the weight become too heavy to carry? The survival pattern of parentification eventually hardens into identity. What began as a set of coping behaviors becomes a mask worn so often that it feels like the child's actual face. To outsiders, nothing seems unusual. To the child, it is simply life. They build masks: the good child, the therapist friend, the achiever. Each role is designed to keep relationships intact and maintain a fragile sense of safety. These masks are not costumes to take on and off. They fuse into the personality itself, hiding the vulnerable self beneath layers of performance. Behind these masks lies a truth few ever see. Deep inside, the real child still cries, "Why didn't anyone protect me?" That question echoes silently for years, unanswered, unresolved. It is the voice of a self that was silenced too early, buried under responsibility and composure. And because no answer comes, the question turns inward. The child grows into an adult who believes the lack of protection was their fault, who assumes they must always be the one to carry the weight. This belief shows up in adulthood as hyper-independence. They refuse help because dependence feels dangerous. They struggle with love because closeness feels like risk. They are restless, always moving, always working, confusing exhaustion with success. Slowing down feels wrong because stillness was never safe. Productivity becomes proof of worth. Overfunctioning becomes the only way they know how to survive in relationships, careers, even friendships. What outsiders often call drive or discipline is, at its core, an inability to rest. The nervous system, shaped in childhood, equates calm with danger. Peace feels suspicious. Silence feels threatening. When life finally offers stability, it feels unfamiliar, even unbearable. They might sabotage it, unconsciously recreating chaos because chaos is what feels normal. This is the tragic legacy of a childhood lived on constant alert. Chaos becomes home. The masks make it difficult for anyone to notice what is truly happening. To the world, they look successful, caring, endlessly capable. They show up for others, they solve problems, they earn praise. But inside, the buried child longs for something no achievement can give: permission to rest, to be vulnerable, to be cared for without conditions. The grief is that few people ever think to ask. Few people look past the performance to see the loneliness underneath. This false self protects, but also imprisons. It hides pain while ensuring that pain is never healed. And the longer the mask is worn, the harder it is to remove. The adult may not even realize it is a mask at all. They believe they are the strong one, the reliable one, the caretaker. But strength without softness becomes brittle. Independence without trust becomes isolation. The very qualities once praised as virtues begin to erode the possibility of genuine connection. Pour Alice, I say, bravery begins to erode the possibility of genuine connection. This tension, the mask versus the buried child, sets the stage for the next reality. What once kept them alive now threatens to suffocate them. The cost of survival becomes clear. To live behind the mask is to remain unseen, even by themselves. And this realization opens the door to the next painful truth: the tragedy of how survival roles, once necessary, transform into prisons that demand escape. The mask may appear convincing, but beneath it the tension grows heavier with time. What looked like strength to others was always survival, and survival has its limits. The hidden child, buried under layers of responsibility, begins to ache louder. From here, another truth emerges, one that explains why these patterns last for so long. Children accept this role not by choice, but by survival instinct. No child volunteers to carry the weight of adults. They do it because the alternative, chaos, abandonment, rejection, feels unbearable. Their nervous system quickly learns that compliance brings safety, silence keeps anger away, maturity earns praise. These strategies are not decisions but reflexes, hardwired into their sense of self. What once saved them now becomes a prison. The habits that kept the household stable, always being useful, never showing need, anticipating danger, become lifelong constraints. The very behaviors that shielded them from pain now prevent them from experiencing joy. Hypervigilance that once protected them from harm now blocks their ability to rest. Fierce independence that once ensured survival now isolates them from intimacy. What worked then is what hurts now. As they grow into adulthood, the disguise only becomes more convincing. Adults who were once parentified children often appear hyphenishing. They hold jobs, care for families, and manage responsibilities with precision. To the outside world, they look capable, disciplined, even admirable. But competence is not the same as wholeness. Behind the surface lies a fragile reality. They are still neglected inner children, hidden behind adult masks. The contradiction runs deep. Outwardly, they may lead teams, raise children, or support friends. Inwardly, they remain stuck in the same question that haunted them years ago. Why didn't anyone protect me? It is not a question that fades with time. It lingers in relationships, resurfaces during stress, and whispers in quiet moments. The world applauds their reliability, but applause cannot quiet the ache for safety. And so, even as they succeed, they carry a secret longing. It is the longing to finally collapse and be held, to stop fixing, stop performing, stop pretending, to rest without guilt, to cry without shame, to admit exhaustion without fear. This longing rarely leaves their lips because the risk feels too great. If they drop the mask, will anyone stay? If they expose the child beneath, will anyone care? Yet the fantasy remains. Perhaps one day someone will see through the facade and offer the comfort that was missing all along. The tragedy is that many spend decades waiting for this rescue. They wait for a partner, a friend, or even a child of their own to give them what they lost. But the rescue never comes in the way they imagine. No one else can return them to the childhood they were denied. This recognition is painful, but also the turning point. It marks the beginning of a new path, not outward, but inward. This tension between the survival mask and the buried child now opens the door to healing. The next step is not about waiting for others, but learning to face the grief directly. It is here that the process of shadow work begins. Witnessing the pain, acknowledging the loss, and choosing to repair what was abandoned long ago. The beginning is a difficult truth. No one outside you can rescue you or repay the debts of childhood. Healing does not arrive from a partner, mentor, or perfect circumstance. It begins within. This is not a sentence of loneliness, but an invitation to agency. When you stop waiting for someone else to complete you, you reclaim authorship of your story. Taking responsibility does not blame the child you once were, it honors the adult you are now. Healing becomes less about being saved and more about practicing daily care for the parts of yourself that were once overlooked. The first step is to witness, not to repair. Witnessing is like turning on a light in a dark room. It is not glamorous, but it is essential. To witness means to name what happened and how it shaped you. Many try to soften the story. It wasn't that bad. Others had it worse. But these phrases erase the truth and keep the inner child invisible. Witnessing restores visibility. It says, what happened mattered, and how I felt mattered too. In practice, witnessing may mean writing down memories without censoring, saying aloud, that hurt me, or simply noticing how your stomach knots when a certain subject comes up. Repair may follow later, but acknowledgement is the foundation. From there, the work turns toward the shadows. Shadow work is not about pretending to be positive or forcing cheerfulness. It is about sitting with the darker currents, anger, grief, envy, unmet needs, without exiling them. These states are not flaws, they are signals. Like warning lights on a dashboard, they reveal where attention is needed. When anger is faced, it often clarifies boundaries. When grief is allowed, it softens into mourning and compassion. When fear is listened to, it becomes information about safety. Helpful practices include journaling dialogues with your shadow parts, tracking body sensations, or speaking in safe groups that can hold intensity. The aim is not to erase darkness, but to integrate it, to become whole rather than hollow. Reversing survival mechanisms is the next step. Many of us survive childhood by hiding tears, numbing needs, or becoming useful to avoid rejection. These strategies were once like a heavy coat in winter. They kept us warm. But carried into adulthood, the same coat becomes suffocating. Reversal means trying what once felt unsafe, crying freely, expressing anger without explosion, telling the truth even if your voice shakes. At first, this feels destabilizing, as if stepping out into cold air without protection. That is why small steps matter. Titrate your feelings, allow them in small doses, and pair them with anchors like steady breathing or a hand on your heart. Each time you permit a feeling to move through, you reassure your inner child, you are safe now, you can exist here. If this work is avoided, the costs are heavy. Adults who never confront their shadows often feel overloaded in relationships, afraid to set boundaries, terrified of being a burden, or desperate for love through usefulness. They become the fixer, the reliable one, the listener who never asks in return. These are coping mechanisms, not identity. Naming them as such reduces shame. Instead of asking what is wrong with me, the question becomes, how did this help me survive? And what would serve me now? That shift from judgment to curiosity is the doorway to freedom. Unlearning describes this process of freedom. You are not erasing the past, you are updating strategies. Survival once required compliance, vigilance, or silence. Healing replaces reflex with choice. You test new beliefs. My needs matter, no is enough. And practice them in small behaviors, declining a request, asking for repair, resting without guilt. Expect awkwardness. Like learning to walk again, it will feel shaky, but repetition builds trust. Each small success proves you can choose differently and remain safe. The meaning of healing is not to become someone new, but to return to your authentic self, the one that existed before masks and performances. This return is not a regression, but a homecoming. You learn to relate without disguises, not because life is suddenly easy, but because you can remain present with difficulty. Witnessing provides language, shadow work offers integration, reversing survival restores flexibility, and unlearning creates choice. Healing, then, is not dramatic triumph, but quiet strength. It is the grounded capacity to meet life as it is, with tenderness, with boundaries, with enough inner safety to stay true. If you want to begin, try something simple today. Write down one childhood memory you usually dismiss, and let yourself feel whatever rises. That small act of witnessing may be the doorway through which the rest of your healing can walk. After the demanding process of shadow work, healing enters a quieter but equally vital stage, listening again to the inner voice. This means turning inward and asking the child within, what did I need back then that I never received? The question seems simple but reaches deep into memory. Often the answers are ordinary: safety, gentleness, encouragement, or the freedom to rest. Yet when these needs go unmet in childhood, they continue to shape us, driving behaviors and expectations in adulthood. Listening to that voice is an act of recognition. It gives space to the self that once had to stay silent and affirms that the needs of the past remain valid in the present. Listening alone, however, is not enough. Healing requires responding to those longings in daily life. We cannot return to childhood, but we can create new conditions as adults. The child who longed for play can now choose moments of joy, whether through hobbies, creativity, or light-hearted conversation. The one who needed recognition can pause to acknowledge effort instead of dismissing it as insufficient. These small gestures matter deeply because they reframe the story. Each time we rest, laugh, or accept kindness without suspicion, we declare, I matter, and my needs are worthy of care. Healing is not grand or dramatic, but steady, enacted through everyday choices that honor what was once denied. Facing these needs also means encountering pain. To admit I longed for safety that never came is to confront both absence and anger. Acknowledging unmet needs feels like reopening an old wound, and grief naturally rises. It may be tempting to avoid this discomfort, but avoidance only prolongs suffering. Pain in this context is not failure, it is a sign of contact with reality. As Rumi observed, the wound is the place where the light enters you. When grief is honored, it softens into mourning rather than bitterness. When anger is faced, it clarifies boundaries instead of turning inward as blame. Pain becomes a teacher, guiding us toward resilience and compassion. To work through pain, we must also release misplaced shame. Many adults condemn themselves for growing up too fast, for hiding behind masks, or for carrying responsibilities beyond their years. But these were not conscious choices. They were survival strategies. A child does not become invisible out of preference, but because invisibility offers safety. To see this truth is to loosen the grip of guilt. The narrative shifts from "something is wrong with me" to "I did what I had to do to endure." With that shift, compassion replaces criticism, and the adult self can honor the creativity of the child instead of condemning it. From compassion comes the freedom to choose anew. As adults, we are no longer bound to strategies that once ensured survival. We can choose softness over armor, calm over chaos, authenticity over performance. These decisions rarely arrive as dramatic changes. They are practiced in ordinary actions, saying no when a request exceeds capacity, allowing ourselves to rest without apology, admitting vulnerability in a safe relationship. Each act is a small declaration that survival no longer dictates our behavior. Over time, these choices accumulate, gradually reshaping life into one guided by intention rather than compulsion. The end of this process is not perfection, but wholeness. Wholeness means the child who once longed and the adult who now decides can stand together, no longer in conflict. It is not flawless completion, but integration, a reconciliation between what hurt and what has healed. To be whole is to play and to work, to grieve and to celebrate, to be tender and strong without splitting parts of oneself away. This is maturity, not as performance, but as authenticity, unfolding naturally when conditions allow. Healing, then, is not about becoming someone new, but about returning to who we truly were before defenses and masks. In this return lies freedom, the freedom to live without disguise, to meet life honestly, and to belong fully to ourselves.